Imagine yourself at 19 years of age, recently cleansed, clothed in fine fabric that isn't yours. You were informed you were being called for duty. You were informed it was a privilege. You were never informed you would return to your dwelling. The hallways are silent, excessively silent. Attendants adjust your garments. Someone corrects the manner you cast your gaze downward. Someone else claims your identity, not to document it, but to eliminate it. Beyond the partition, you detect respiration. Gentle, measured, commanding. You don't observe her yet, but you already comprehend this is not a formal assignment. In mere moments, you will discover why you were selected. In mere moments, you will comprehend why nobody requested your permission. And in mere moments, you'll recognize this evening is not about longing whatsoever. It's about entry. This isn't fantasy. This wasn't a controversy murmured by adversaries. This was protocol. And the individual waiting beyond the veil was not a male sovereign. Her identity was Wu Zetian, and what she constructed within the Forbidden City was so disturbing that chronicles attempted to eliminate the males first and transform her into a demon afterward. And this tale did not commence with abundance. It commenced with a young woman. Before we venture any further into this tale, if concealed terrors of bygone times captivate you, subscribe to Sinister Empires. Press the approval button. And once you arrive at the instant that disturbs you most, inform me where you're observing from. The year was 624. During the pinnacle of the Tang dynasty, a child was delivered beneath a structure that did not yield for females. She was not nobility. She was not a successor. She was Wu, offspring of a prosperous lumber trader from Sichuan, a territory where females' utterances disappeared into peaks before they were acknowledged. While males studied the ancient texts and pursued positions, Wu studied in darkness. She followed the writings of deceased scholars, committed to memory chronicles, verse, reasoning, not for enjoyment, but for endurance. Even at 14, she grasped it in her realm, understanding pierced more profoundly than weapons. That identical year, her destiny was determined. An imperial directive summoned her to the compound as a secondary companion to Emperor Taizong. It was labeled a privilege. In reality, it was captivity disguised as advantage. The compound was not a dwelling. It was an apparatus. Countless females waited their complete existence for a solitary acknowledgement. Most were never recognized. Most vanished without notice. Wu did not wait. She observed. She absorbed. She examined authority the way others examine needlework. While fingers stitched fine cloth, she stitched escape routes in her thoughts. She mastered the dialect of quietness, the significance behind gestures of respect, the importance carried by a look sustained excessively long. Taizong scarcely noticed her. Years elapsed untouched. Then, as custom required, the sovereign perished. By tradition, Wu's existence should have concluded with his. As a previous companion, she was dispatched to a Buddhist monastery. Silence, isolation, erasure, but oblivion never arrived. At 26, when she should dissolve into obscurity, Wu returned to the compound, not as a phantom, but as flame. Against every regulation, she became partner to Gaozong, the new sovereign and descendant of the man who once possessed her destiny. It was beyond forbidden. It was unparalleled. Chronicles never fully clarify how she returned. A clandestine, hidden partnerships, flawless timing. What is undeniable is this. Wu Zetian never abandoned anything to fortune. Once within again, she acted swiftly. Competitors disappeared. The empress was degraded. Others were hushed or dispatched elsewhere. No visible carnage, only absences that accumulated like autumn foliage. When Gaozong grew weak, Wu became his spokesman. She released proclamations, encountered ambassadors, rendered verdicts. The empire already submitted to her. Only the designation remained. In the year 690, she abandoned the pretense. Wu Zetian proclaimed herself Empress of China. Not guardian, not joint sovereign, but singular ruler. She established her own dynasty and governed for nearly 20 years. The Confucian structure trembled. Academics referenced writings that no longer pertained, because Wu Zetian was not a defect in the arrangement. She was its reversal. She administered competently. She restructured departments. She elevated capability over heritage. Every manuscript carried her command, but her most revolutionary impression was left not in legislation, but in the intimate quarters of the compound. There, where authority had constantly flowed from sovereign to females, Wu Zetian rerouted it, because she grasped something no sovereign before her ventured to acknowledge. The physical form had constantly been a governmental instrument, so she selected a different approach. Wu Zetian did not do this for satisfaction. She did it for dominance. Chronicles would subsequently denounce her with specific rage, because nothing disturbs male supremacy more than witnessing its own principles mirrored back in opposite. What had constantly been tolerated in male sovereigns, extensive pleasure quarters, satisfaction chambers, closeness exchanged for advancement, became an intolerable controversy the instant a female wielded the identical authority. In Chronicles, masculine longing was governmental. Feminine longing was regarded as a transgression. By now, the seat of power was protected. The coronet was no longer representational. Wu Zetian had not merely endured the structure. She had emptied it out and entered inside solitary. But even complete command cannot operate on proclamations alone. Authority needs observers. It needs listeners. It needs individuals near enough to detect treachery before it utters. The genuine pivotal moment did not arrive on combat fields. It arrived in the scented passageways of the compound. Wu Zetian did not transform the structure. She twisted it until it became an armament. From this choice emerged the concubine, officially a ritual position, unofficially a monitoring apparatus disguised as closeness. In application, it operated as a state-regulated masculine pleasure quarters. The males were not selected for aristocratic lineage or combat expertise. They were chosen by alternative criteria: the strength of a jawline, the balance of features, the gentleness of tone, the grace of fingers moving across a chin. Some arrived through ambitious administrators who presented their own offspring as symbols of allegiance. Others were discovered by discreet agents dispatched across the territories to identify young males who were obedient, unattached, and readily eliminated. Wu Zetian was said to enforce rigid criteria: unblemished youth, perfect complexion, intellect combined with compliance. She was not gathering asso. Sciates. She was constructing tools. Each male was instructed not only in closeness, but in observing. They discovered how to watch without being detected, how to linger in a chamber, how to interpret sighs, hesitations, and stares into intelligence. To belong to the concubine was to transform into the empire's perception wrapped in fine fabric. The initial to ascend was Feng Xiaobao, delivered without rank or ancestry in a countryside settlement. One day, he was spotted by a royal daughter. Shortly thereafter, he was bowing beside the imperial chamber. To validate his attendance, he was consecrated as a Buddhist religious figure and renamed Shuihui. Though there was nothing ascetic about his rise, he became Wu Zetian's concealed companion, messenger, and executor. He authorized sacred buildings, supervised the building of the Hall of Brilliance, and obtained combat distinctions without ever raising a blade. He mounted imperial steeds. He degraded administrators with a grin. He voiced when the emperor stayed quiet, but authority consumed his preferred. Huai grew conceited. He openly disrespected Taoist religious figures, certain of his invulnerability. Then he violated the boundary, after a disagreement with the empress. He ignited the Hall of Brilliance, the exact structure that represented her command. The structure blazed. So did his safeguarding. He was attacked and executed, his identity eliminated, his remains dispersed at the White Horse Temple. No memorial followed. No grief was allowed. Yet the emptiness he left did not stay vacant. After him arrived Shin Nanxiao, the reserved one, not a statesman, not an executor, perhaps a player of instruments, perhaps a healer, perhaps a composer. What mattered was what he did not pursue. He requested no positions. He monitored no one. He delivered no verdict. He performed the qin as if presenting comfort rather than aspiration. His quietness inside a structure built on domination became scarce enough to be accepted. He endured until his peaceful demise, speculated to have originated from a remedy. He formulated himself. No animosity followed him, only murmurs. He was the anomaly. The most dreaded figures arrived subsequently, the Zhang siblings. Zhang Yiji and Zhang Changzong were not simply associates. They were hubs of influence, presented through privileged endorsement, some claimed by Princess Taiping. They rapidly became the sentries of the realm. Youthful, cultured, merciless, they converted the Kongqin into something nearer to a concealed administration. No determination reached the empress without traveling through them. One administered receptions and international representatives. The other composed proclamations. Administrators knelt before them before they ever observed Wu Zetian. For the Confucian privileged class, this was insufferable, not because a pleasure quarters existed, but because it succeeded. The siblings were officials, monitors, envoys, and representations of everything. The male-dominated structure refused. Wu Zetian had claimed the ancient blueprint women, submit men direct, and liquefied it in the flames of her coronet. Longing became a purpose of the realm. Closeness became monitoring. Subsequent chroniclers would label her twisted, not for her deeds, but because she employed masculine regulations more successfully than most sovereigns. By 699, the Kongqin was fully established. It had hierarchies, documentation, and responsibilities. Some participants composed imperial verse. Others conducted ceremonies. Many possessed designations and properties, but all were instruments on Wu Zetian's playing field. There was no sentiment, only calculation. The empress did not rest with males. She rested with intelligence. The capital murmured inconceivable quantities. 3,000 males, one for each evening. But those calculations were overstatement formed by dread. The reality was more troubling. Her establishment was not excess. It was a reflection, and it exposed what authority resembles when stripped of gender. Complete authority never stays motionless. It expands, solidifies, and ultimately decays from within like produce abandoned excessively long in the temperature. That deterioration is what finally overcame Wu Zetian's compound. By the initial years of the fresh century, the empress was declining. Her vision, once keen enough to hush officials, now strained in the shadowy passageways. The tone that had once paralyzed battalions emerged in fragmented respirations, diminished by temperature and hacking. The physical form that had challenged in realm was transforming into its own confinement. On the exterior, the government still operated. In reality, what Wu Zetian presided over was no longer a governmental core, but a growth dressed as a governing body. The Zhang siblings had become its essential components. They were no longer preferred. They were the arrangement. They regulated entry, determined strategy, and reformed command as if the seat were a personal amusement platform. Wu Zetian had bestowed them such closeness that the division between her intention and theirs obscured beyond identification. As the empress deteriorated, they prospered. Their youthfulness stood out harshly among the aging assembly. Their fine garments, refined complexion, and elegant actions at feasts contrasted severely with the austerity of the ancient nobility. Attractiveness itself became a symbol of command, and that rendered them insufferable. The compound began to rotate on itself. Speculation sharpened into armaments. Murmur spoke of ceremonies disguised as abundance, of communal baths, of foreign fragrances meant to conceal deterioration, not only of the empress's physical form, but of complete government. Each narrative fed the identical verdict. Something had proceeded excessively distant. Wu Zetian clung to the seat as the evenings grew extended. Slumber abandoned her. She was protected by attendants who no longer knew whether they attended a sovereign or a phantom. Her fingers trembled as she authorized proclamations. Her recollection wavered, but her determination, even in decline, remained unbroken, and had terrified her adversaries more than her capability ever had. Influential females are accepted only if they diminish silently. Wu Zetian refused. She did not relinquish. She did not withdraw. She elected to perish an empress. And for that, chronicles punish her, not with metal but with toxin, the toxin of mockery, manipulation, and reconstructed recollection. While her physical form diminished, the Zhang siblings governed from the brightened darkness. One managed international representatives with calculated grins. The other supervised the Confucian, now functioning as a government within the government. No designation, no termination, no communication escaped their examination. Some administrators fractured under the tension. Some claimed their own existences. Others attempted departure. None PR. Availed. The monitoring system Wu Zetian had established had rotated internally. The pleasure quarters, once her keenest armament, became her enclosure. She no longer ambulated. She was transported to the compound in a gilded carrier, veiled in scented draperies that barely had the odor of deterioration. Her digits expanded, her complexion paled. Only the Zhang siblings were authorized to contact her. Only they obtained her utterances. That uniqueness maintained their authority and confirmed her destiny. Assembly existence became insufferable. Every feast, every reception, every quietness felt burdened. Mistrust thickened the atmosphere. Treachery no longer murmured. It anticipated. Silently, an alliance developed. Senior administrators, experienced commanders, academics who had once bowed to her command. They did not vocalize. They did not mobilize masses. They organized in conclusion. The overthrow arrived without display. One dawn, the compound barriers simply stayed secured. Passageways stood vacant. Players of instruments did not perform. Attendants looked elsewhere. At the hub of the motionlessness, Wu Zetian, enveloped in silken temperature, comprehended what authority could not forestall. Allegiance cannot endure on dread alone. Dread, like all existing things, eventually expires. The winter of 705 arrived without frozen precipitation, but weighted with metal. The compound awakened to the noise of armored footfalls grinding stone. No trumpets proclaimed the alteration. Chronicles simply transformed. Entrances once accessible to the Zhang siblings were barricaded. Servants evaded their vision. Everyone grasped this was not a surprise. It was a termination. The siblings were captured at sunrise, still in their sleeping garments. One attempted bargaining. The other pleaded. There were no hearings, no official accusations. The judgment arrived instantly. They were terminated in the interior courtyards. Their skulls were exhibited at the northern entrance where international representatives had once traveled. The communication was undeniable. The physical form that had claimed the seat would be cleansed with carnage and display. Wu Zetian was roused by unfamiliar individuals, not recognizable tones, not faithful countenances. Her physical form resisted motion. Temperature blazed through her. Still she grasped. The seat had deserted her before her physical form did. She was compelled to renounce, not by blades or restraints, but by manuscript stamps and empty ritual utterances voiced by males who had once quivered before her. The proclamation was confirmed with her insensitive fingers. Dark pigment stained her fingertip. No one cleansed it away. When a male sovereign collapses, his adversaries often bestow him catastrophe. When an empress collapses, they transform her into a demon. Overthrow is never sufficient. Her aspiration must become insanity. Her longing must be reinterpreted as affliction. Her heritage must be diminished to controversy. Wu Zetian was transferred to a subordinate compound, not formally incarcerated, but rendered unseen. She obtained no briefings, released no proclamations, witnessed nothing beyond barriers and unknown servants. She expired shortly thereafter. The precise date was never meticulously documented. There was no communal grief, no imperial march, Only a humble interment followed by something far more comprehensive than demise. Elimination. Administrative chronicles were modified. The identities of her associates were extracted. The concubine was disbanded. Her proclamations were invalidated or redistributed. In Confucian writings, she became a caution. In verse, a distortion. In traditional tales, a sorceress. Yet suppression is never absolute. Some chroniclers left fragments behind, annotations and margins, particulars too exact to fabricate, designations she bestowed, regulations she transformed, administrators she elevated for capability rather than lineage, remnants of a sovereign who administered as males had constantly done, but compensated a cost none of them ever encountered. After her collapse, the restored Tang regime invested resources into reconstructing her recollection. They could not eliminate her existence, so they mutilated it. She became the empress of 3,000 companions, a hideous figure who abandoned males as readily as proclamations, a nonconformist who positioned her chamber above the regulation. These portrayals were reiterated until they crystallized into principle, and with each repetition, the intricacy disappeared. The calculation behind closeness vanished because the reality was more menacing than any legend. Wu Zetian was not annihilated by abundance. She was annihilated by lucidity. Her physical form expired, but her recollection was condemned to more gradual termination, selective amnesia, intentional manipulation, a narrative contaminated at its origin. For eras, administrative chronicles dragged her identity through derision. Her governing capability went unexamined. Her capacity to govern independently over a massive realm was disregarded. Only one charge endured, that she had converted the assembly into a pleasure house. Confucian historian perfected a nonviolent armament. Reconstruction, each companion was inflated, each communal evening magnified. The concubine, once a governmental establishment, was retrospectively portrayed as an administrative pleasure house. Males who had functioned as envoys, composers, and administrators were diminished to playthings. None of this materializes in the authentic imperial records. These narratives surfaced subsequently when masculine governance needed validation, when her figure became a caution to aspiring females. In these retellings, the influential female constantly concludes the identical manner. Solitary, elderly, despised. In administrative chronicles, masculine longing is presented as steadiness. A sovereign's pleasure quarters signals distinction, potency, continuity. Feminine longing, by opposition, is regarded as degradation. When Wu Zetian mirrored her forerunners, chronicles did not label it command. It labeled it transgression. It labeled it ailment. The masculine pleasure quarters left no offspring. No family names endured. No children asserted ancestry. That rendered elimination simple. There are no monuments for Shuihui, no inscriptions for Shenanqiao. The Zhang siblings appear only as representations of degradation, never as tacticians. Their images were obliterated, their burial sites defaced, their identities severed from lineage. They were extracted with exactness, as if they had never existed. And yet their vacancy speaks more powerfully than documentation ever could. Every quietness in chronicles is a revelation. Every biography that diminishes Wu Zetian to her companions exposes more about the dread of the authors than about the empress herself. What she represented was not simply a reversal of gender positions. It was a me, naced to the basis of male supremacy itself. That a female could long without authorization, employ bodies as tools of government, and govern without relinquishing dominance of her intimate existence. For that, she was punished not for frailty, not for oppression, but for demonstrating that authority has no gender. Chronicles does. Her burial site still stands in Luoyang. It bears no memorial inscription, no designations, no clarification, only stone breeze and intentional quietness. Beneath it rests one of the most uncomfortable realities of imperial China. A female governed as successfully as any male, and her establishment was not decadence but reflection. For eras we were instructed to revere sovereigns for their abundance and dread empresses for theirs. We were informed Wu Zetian was hazardous because she longed excessively much, never that the males before her were celebrated for the identical conduct. But what was prohibited was never longing. It was juxtaposition. And narrating these accounts does more than resurrect the bygone. It shatters the administrative narrative, because every occasion to conceal reality is uttered, "Chronicles trembles." Leave your comment below. Was Wu Zetian a despot or the reflection masculine authority? Refuse to confront. We'll encounter you next occasion.